Story 1. The Watcher in the Walls. This happened back in the summer of 2016. I was taking a short vacation with my girlfriend, and we decided to rent a nice little place on Airbnb. It was a small house tucked away in the woods in upstate New York, far from any neighbors or main roads. The photos online showed a cozy, rustic cabin, and it looked like the perfect place to get away from the city for a few days. We arrived in the late afternoon. The house was exactly as advertised: wooden interior, a big stone fireplace, and a massive window in the living room that looked out onto a thick forest. We unpacked, grabbed some groceries from the nearby town, and spent the first night just relaxing and enjoying the quiet. It was so peaceful. A little too peaceful, maybe. The kind of silence that feels heavy and complete, like the air itself has gone still. The second night, things started to get weird. My girlfriend was asleep in the bedroom, and I was up late watching a movie on my laptop in the living room. It was probably around 2 a.m. when I started hearing a strange scratching sound. It was faint at first, like a mouse scurrying behind the walls. I didn't think much of it. Old houses in the woods are bound to have critters. But the sound wasn't random. It was a repetitive, rhythmic scratching. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause, scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like it was coming from the wall right behind the TV. I tried to ignore it, but the pattern was unnerving. It was almost deliberate. I paused the movie, and the scratching stopped immediately. I waited for a few minutes, not a sound. The moment I hit play again, it started right back up. I paused it again. Silence. This time I stayed paused for about 10 minutes, and the quiet held. I finally gave up and went to bed. The next day, I didn't mention it to my girlfriend. I figured it was just some animal and didn't want to freak her out. But that night, the scratching came back, only louder and from a different part of the house. It was now coming from the wall behind our bed. I could feel the vibrations through the headboard. It wasn't a rodent. The sound was too heavy, too precise. It was a slow, dragging sound now, like something was being pulled along the inside of the drywall. My girlfriend was fast asleep, but I was wide awake, my heart pounding in my chest. The dragging stopped, and then I heard a low, metallic scraping sound. It sounded like a nail or something sharp being dragged slowly across a wooden surface just on the other side of the wall. I held my breath, listening, and then I heard a new sound, a soft, almost inaudible shuffling right at the corner of the room, as if something was slowly shifting its weight. The shuffling sound got closer and then stopped. I could feel a cold presence in the room, a heaviness in the air that wasn't there before. The scraping sound from the wall started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a drag. It was a tapping. A slow, deliberate tapping, like someone lightly knocking on the inside of the wall. I strained my ears, and I could hear a faint, high-pitched scratching right by the window. I slowly turned my head, and I saw a small, dark shape pressed against the glass from the outside just for a moment before it disappeared. I grabbed my phone, and with trembling hands, I shone the flashlight on the window. Nothing was there. I turned the light back to the wall, and the tapping stopped. The shuffling was gone. The entire house was silent again. The feeling of being watched, however, was stronger than ever. We packed up our stuff the next morning and left, cutting our vacation short. We didn't even bother to tell the owner what happened. To this day, I have no idea what was in those walls or who or what was watching us that night. I never looked at an Airbnb listing the same way again. Story 2. The Unseen Guest. This happened to my brother and me in the summer of 2019. We decided to take a spontaneous trip to New Orleans. We found this historic-looking Airbnb in the French Quarter. The place had a lot of character. It was a narrow, two-story building with a small courtyard and a huge balcony. The owner mentioned in the listing that the place was over 100 years old, which we thought was kind of cool. We were just there to explore the city, so we didn't pay much attention to the old world charm. We spent our first 2 days just walking around, listening to live jazz, and eating good food. The place was old, creaky floors and all, but nothing felt wrong. It was just an old house. The strangeness started on the third night. My brother was asleep in his room on the ground floor, and I was in the bedroom upstairs. I woke up to the sound of something shifting. It sounded like someone was dragging a chair across the stone floor in the courtyard below. I knew my brother was asleep, and it was way too late for the neighbors to be doing anything like that. The scraping sound stopped, and then I heard a new sound, footsteps. They were slow and heavy, like someone was shuffling their feet on the cobblestone. I leaned out the window to look, but the courtyard was empty. The sound of the footsteps faded, and then I heard them again, this time on the staircase inside the house. I froze in my bed, listening. The steps were slow and deliberate, making the old wood groan under the weight. Creak, creak, creak. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening for anything. Then I heard a soft whispering sound, as if someone was trying to say my name. It wasn't my brother's voice, and it sounded wet. I didn't move. The whispering stopped, and I heard a different sound from the hall. It was a tapping, like someone was lightly running their finger along the wall. The tapping got faster and faster, and then I heard it on my bedroom door. A frantic, rhythmic tapping, like something was getting impatient. I wanted to scream, to wake my brother, but I couldn't move. The tapping stopped. The shuffling in the hallway was gone. A moment later, I heard the faint sound of the front door opening and closing on the ground floor. I knew it wasn't my brother leaving. He had to be asleep. I slowly got out of bed, grabbing the closest thing I could find, a small wooden chair, and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The house was completely silent. I crept down to the ground floor, and I could see the front door was slightly ajar, letting in a sliver of moonlight. I slowly pushed it open and looked out into the deserted street. Nothing was there. I turned back and saw that the small table in the hallway had been moved a few inches, and a single, wet footprint was on the stone floor beneath it. It was too big to be my brother's foot. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest, and ran to my brother's room. I woke him up, but when I tried to explain what happened, he just thought I had a bad dream. The next day, we checked out, leaving our trip short. We never told the owner what happened, and I never saw a review on that Airbnb that mentioned anything strange. But I still remember that wet footprint on the floor. It wasn't human. And I still don't know what opened the front door that night or what its intentions were. Story 3. The Forest's Edge. This happened to my wife and me in the fall of 2017. We had just moved to a small town in Oregon, and we decided to rent an Airbnb for a couple of weeks while our new house was getting ready. The place was a small cabin right on the edge of a national forest. We thought it was perfect, quiet, private, and with endless trails for us to hike with our dog. The owner was a nice old lady who lived in the main house a few hundred feet away. She told us to feel free to explore the trails, but to be back before dark, as the forest could be unpredictable at night. We just laughed it off, thinking she was just being a cautious old woman. Our first few days were great. We went on long hikes, and the dog loved running around in the woods. But on the fourth day, as the sun was starting to set, we were walking back to the cabin when we heard a sound. It wasn't loud, just a low, guttural growl coming from deeper in the woods. It sounded like a large animal, maybe a bear, so we quickly leashed the dog and started walking faster. The growling stopped, but we felt like we were being watched. Every time we looked back, we saw nothing but trees and shadows. We made it back to the cabin just as the last bit of light faded. We locked the doors and went inside. We were making dinner when we heard it again. This time, it wasn't a growl. It was a tapping coming from the big window in the living room. Tap, tap.
What was that sound?
Tap. It was slow and deliberate. We looked at each other, and my wife whispered, "What was that?"
It sounds
We crept to the window and looked out.
there?
The woods were a solid wall of blackness. We couldn't see anything.
Do not know.
The tapping stopped. A few minutes later, we heard a new sound, a high-pitched shriek, like a woman screaming, coming from the direction of the woods. It sounded so close and so real that my wife grabbed me, her face white with fear. The dog started barking frantically, his hair standing on end. The screaming stopped as quickly as it started, and the only sound was the dog's terrified whimpering. We were standing there, frozen, when we heard another sound from outside. This time, it was from the front porch. A soft, shuffling sound, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy body dragging itself across the wooden floor. My wife started to cry, and I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The shuffling stopped right in front of the door. And then, we heard a new sound. A low, raspy whisper coming from the other side of the door. It wasn't speaking any language we could understand. It sounded like it was trying to imitate a voice, but it was just a series of wet, guttural sounds. The whisper stopped, and the house fell completely silent.
What was that?
We spent the rest of the night huddled together in the bedroom, with the lights on and the dog shaking under the bed. The next morning, we packed up our car in silence and drove away. We didn't even say goodbye to the owner. As we were leaving, I looked at the front door and saw a long, dark scratch mark on the wood, like something had dug its claws into it. We never went back to that town, and I never saw a review on that Airbnb mentioning anything strange. I still don't know what that thing was in the woods or what it wanted, but I'll never forget that awful scraping sound on the porch.